And here we are, direct from Turner, Maine, with Diana Rose Wolkow, former executive pastry chef at City Tavern Restaurant, now teaching Maine how to eat. Take it away, Diana.
Thank you for that introduction, Mark slash father, who approached me about this very demonstration long time ago, like late spring, early summer, something like that, which you would think would have given me plenty of time to decide what I'm going to make and share with you all and get everything prepared and set up. Well, then summer hit and I was busy enjoying what little of it we have here. And it got pushed to the back burner. I was like, oh, I got so much time to think about that. Great. Back burner, next back burner. So far on the back burner that it fell off the stove and I completely forgot. So whoops. And then later in the summer, as we're planning one of our typical Walco gatherings where we celebrate 3 to 4 months worth of holidays all in one event, I was reminded that, oh yeah, this is coming up too. And oh, what should I make? So I started mulling it over between winter preparation chores because in Maine here, winter preparation chores start in August. And it dawned on me as I was tripping over the squash vines in my garden. Butternut squash upside down cake. Why not? Now there's nothing wrong with the classic fall Thanksgiving desserts. Ask anybody about my pumpkin pie and apple crisp. They are divine and not going to be made today. I just wanted to share something a little bit more original and interesting for this lovely occasion. So this recipe was developed several years ago while working at City Tavern when I was asked to come up with a solution to an overabundance of frozen cubed butternut squash. So today I'm not going to use frozen cubed butternut squash. You, of course, can use frozen cubed butternut squash. I'm using squash from my garden. So, yeah, so it was quite a hit at the restaurant. And that's kind of what that, in addition to the tripping incident in the garden, led me here today. It's a pretty straightforward, simple kind of recipe, dissimilar from the classic pineapple upside down cake, but all in all, still technically upside. And really all that means is you build it upside down, right? And then you flip it out. Not as sweet and sticky as your traditional kind, but delicious nonetheless. Highly customizable to your own taste, what kind of equipment, pans, things like that you have. It's a very scalable recipe, so you can double it and make lots or half it. I've actually already halved it and make enough for, 2 or 3. And flavor profile, if you're not into squash or if you're not into butternut squash, use a different kind of squash. If you grew other kind of squash, you can use that in placement. If you're not a squash person, you can use something else completely. Apples, pears. If you guys want recommendations on other things to use, we can maybe talk about that later. But also, if you're not into the upside down cake thing, just make the cake part. It's really good. So we have 2 components here, the squash part and the cake part. And the cake is an olive oil cake. So it's really nice and moist, less sweet, which I really appreciate for an upside down cake since we are adding some extra sugar to the top there. But yeah, the olive oil cake is really nice, very moist. And again, delicious on its own. Just make it without the topping and sprinkle it with some sugar if you want. Really good. So let's see. It's got all the fall flavors that you want, but just something like slightly different. So let's see. We'll start with the squash. I already roasted my squash. Actually, I did this last Friday, which is another great part about this recipe is you can compartmentalize. The actual mixing and baking doesn't really take that long. The whole recipe's relatively quick, but you can save yourself a step by doing this in advance. Whether you're using that store-bought frozen cubed stuff or fresh, you can slice it, cube it, cut it into little stars if you want, whatever kind of design you want for the top, perfectly fine. But you do want to start with roasted squash. So what I've done is just washed and peeled my squash, and then I've cut it into these thin slices here. As you can see, they're nice and flexible now. Wash, cut, lay out on a sheet pan lined with parchment paper, or just on your sheet pan if you're into cleaning pans like that. Brush it with olive oil, brush all the slices with olive oil, drizzle with a little bit of maple syrup. And I use cayenne pepper, just a little bit, not enough to make it spicy hot. But when we talk about winter and fall spices and things being warm, like cinnamon and nutmeg and all of that, I also really enjoy an actual little bit of real heat. You can completely eliminate that if you're not into spice or sensitive to it, or just don't like it, or the idea of like a spicy dessert. I didn't use enough to make it spicy. It literally just adds a little bit of warmth when you're eating it if it's, you know, say room temperature. So you can totally eliminate that if it's a thing. But sheet pan, squash down, brush it with olive oil, maple syrup, little salt, cayenne pepper if you're into it. Roast it. When they're thin like this, they really only take about 15 minutes. I did flip them halfway through so they didn't brown too much on either side. And you can see they're not really, you can see, they're not really brown. They're just soft. You don't want to crisp them up too much, especially if they're thin like this. If you've got cubes, a little browning on the edge is fine. But because you're going to put them in the bottom of the pan and cook them again, you don't want them to be too cooked on the first round. Otherwise, you can get like some sharp edges in there that are less than desirable. So, got to get that done first because you don't want to put your hot cake batter or your cake batter on top of freshly roasted squash and melt it. So, get those roasted. You can do it a couple days in advance. Just make sure they're cool before you put them in your pan. So, when it comes time to get ready to bake the cake, set your oven to 375. Which we might adjust later. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but my house is cold. It's like 60 degrees in here almost all the time. So when I open my oven door later to put everything in that's room temperature, my room temperature is 60 degrees. So my pan is really cold. The batter is probably going to be on the cold side. So when I open that oven, I want it to recoup the temperature as quickly as possible, especially important for baking. So I've got it set a little bit high. At the halfway point, I'll probably turn it down so that it doesn't burn the top of the cake, but 375. And if you don't have an oven thermometer, and I don't mean the one that you set to turn your oven on, one that lives inside your oven to tell you the actual temperature, get one. It's very important to know the actual temperature inside your oven. Hang it from the middle, right next to where you're going to put your cake. So oven is set to 375, and we'll get our pan ready. I'm using a loaf pan. This is a 9-inch by 5-inch loaf pan. It's your standard. It does have coating in there. I have brushed the inside underneath the paper with olive oil, and then I've put a little piece of parchment in there and brushed it again with olive oil. You can use whatever size cake pan you want. The actual recipe I'm making today will make one 9-inch pan that, you know, comes about that high. You can use a round pan, like an 8-inch round would probably be about equivalent to this pan. You could make little mini cupcakes. I would probably recommend more of a silicone for cupcakes because you're going to have a harder time getting them out. You can use a bundt pan. You can use whatever you got. If you were going to double this recipe to make more, this 8-inch pan, depending on how you cut it, will probably easily serve 6 to 8 people. Probably up to 12, depending on how thick you cut your slices. Yes, so you can use whatever kind of pan you want. If you're gonna double the recipe, you would get either 2 of these or maybe like a 10-inch, like a 9 or 10-inch round cake. So let's see, we're gonna get this ready. Just put that olive oil around there. And we're gonna get this set up so that when the batter is done, it doesn't sit too long before we put it in the pan. The longer your batter sits, you will see that we're going to whip a lot of air into the sugar and egg yolks. You don't want to lose all that air while you're getting your pan ready and setting your oven and arranging your. So you want to get this done first so that as soon as the batter is mixed, we can get it in the pan in the oven as quickly as possible. So let's see if I can turn this around for you guys to see. Yes, here we go.
Cameraman.
Okay, So we'll just hold it. Here's our pan. Yay. And here's our squash. And what I'm going to start with is some maple syrup. This is homemade maple syrup because I'm fancy like that. Harvested from the trees in our backyard. I'm going to go with like 2 or 3 tablespoons of maple syrup right into the bottom of the oil pan. Just going to kind of shake that around. You don't have to worry about it being too even because it's going to move as we layer in our squash. So you can do whatever kind of pattern you want. I made kind of a mistake on the first test batch and I spaced them kind of far, not quite that far, too far apart. They were probably shingled about that. I want more. So, so I'm going to layer them pretty close together. And this was a pretty sizable squash. I don't know the poundage on it, but this is only maybe like, so if you, I don't know about you guys, but most of the squash you see in the store, especially if it's not from the organic section, is like ridiculously large. Butternut squash, you could use a honey nut squash or something flavor profile smaller. Yeah, so this is buy one, make several things from it, whether you're making a whole lot of cake or, you know, save a little bit for your cake and then make some butternut squash soup or curry or something else. And again, use as little or as much as you like. I really like the squash, so I'm putting a lot in. If you're like less of a fan of squash, you could just you could make some sort of pattern. You could somebody's name out. I don't know. Get creative. Lots of slices in here. That looks pretty good. Nice. Ah. So we're going to set that aside for later and get started. I'm going to just here. Okay. Ingredient time. Yay, all these lovely ingredients. I'm using my stand mixer. You can totally do this by hand. It's not bad. Or if you have non-stand. Not that many ingredients, right? So we're going to start with our flour here. Diana, this is just all-purpose. Yes.
When you were over the mixer, we lost your audio for about 5 seconds. Could you repeat whatever you were saying when you were over the mixer?
Yeah. So, yes, using a stand mixer. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was just mentioning that you can use your stand mixer if you have one, and if you don't, you could do it by hand. It would be like a mild workout, not a crazy workout, but a mild one. You can also just use a hand mixer if you have like a beater or like an immersion blender with a whisk end to it. Also an option there, but we are going to be incorporating a lot of air into our eggs and sugar, so be prepared for that if you're going to do it by hand. So not too many ingredients here. This is just some all-purpose flour that I don't know if bother sifting unless absolutely necessary. I just use my little baby whisk here to whisk out the lumps. And we are going to add baking powder and baking soda, a little bit of kosher salt. And this is about a teaspoon each, I think, of cinnamon and ground cardamom. I really like cardamom. If it's not your thing, you can omit it and use the cinnamon, or you can add or others. So we're just going to mix those together so that when we're ready for that, incorporated and go. That was into our mixer. We will put 1.5 eggs. Now, 1.5 eggs. It's annoying, right? I agree. This original recipe is scaled back quite a bit. When it comes to half an egg, these are extra large eggs. For this recipe, and most of the time when I split eggs, I'm not doing it by weight. So you can do it by weight. Or if you want to weigh your individual egg, I think it's 76 grams or something like that. If you're just going to keep it simple, which for this recipe you can, there's no need to be use one egg and one yolk from the whites, or you can break it up and take half of the mixture. For this recipe, the reason I'm choosing the yolk, they're about equal weight. Because this is an olive oil cake, it's already going to be plenty moist. The reason you would choose a yolk is chewiness and moisture to a cake. It's not necessary here. We want a little bit more loft from the egg white, so choose the egg, one whole egg, or you can split. Whatever you want.
For some reason, the audio is like coming in and out. I don't know why.
Okay.
Everyone else is muted, so it's not that someone else is. There's noise elsewhere. I'm not sure what's making it.
Maybe it's because I had these separated. Let me know if it keeps happening, and I'll try to keep this in my ear.
Okay, well,
or maybe if I actually
keep talking.
okay, sorry. Technical difficulties. All right, so eggs. Yes, good. I know it's annoying to use half of an egg, so if you want to just use the white, you can use the white. So we're going to add those into our bowl, and I'll flip my camera around in a minute here. So that's 1.5 eggs, sugar, and
a small egg. Would that be the same as a large 1.5 egg?
You could. Now, if you have chickens and you're picking them from your backyard and you have one chicken that lays large eggs and one chicken that lays small eggs, that's easy. If you want to buy 2 cartons of eggs at the store and get some small ones, or like, 2 quail eggs plus 1 chicken egg, there's probably some math there that you can do, but don't overthink it. Take a note from me. Okay, this is okay. So, I'm going to turn this around now again. Go hands-free here. Okay, so into the bowl of our mixer, we have our eggs, and this is just sugar with about like 1/4 of a lemon zested. You can also use orange if you want. Orange would be very nice paired with this. We just have a little bit of lemon zest and lemon juice. If you wanted to use orange zest and orange juice, you totally could. Again, that's a nice complement to the butternuts. So we will turn this on, and we want this to be nice and fluffy. Hopefully this isn't too loud. Let me know.
We do not hear it at all. That's what Zoom is taking away mechanical noises.
Okay, awesome. So we're gonna mix this on high once the sugar gets in there, so we're not making a mess everywhere. For like 3 to 5 minutes. We really want it to be nice and light and thick. So as soon as you start to whip it, you can see that it gets lighter in color, but that thickness is gonna come from really just letting it whip. So we're gonna let it whip for like 4 minutes or something. And I'll stop and scrape it down as we go. And in the meantime, we'll talk about olive oil because everyone loves that. I'll get like just a little bit preachy on the olive oil just for a minute, only because this recipe, it contains a lot of olive oil. We're gonna use almost, well, this is about a 1/2 cup of extra virgin olive oil. I'm gonna move away from this because it's loud. When it comes to olive oil, we try to find single source on single origin, and that's mostly because it's gonna taste better, mostly because there's like X percentage of olive oil that's allowed to have other oil in it, without especially stating that on the label. So especially if for health reasons or whatever you're trying to avoid other oils, namely canola, soybean, whatever, other kinds of oils, you're more likely to get those snuck into your olive oil if you're using a blended olive oil. So try to get single origin if you can, because it's slightly better. But whatever kind of olive oil, like extra virgin for this. Do you taste the olive oil in it? No, not really. Especially with the other spice and the squash and everything, you really don't taste it. It's way more of a texture thing, and it just makes this really moist, velvety, fine crumb textured cake. It's really good, and you know, maybe slightly healthier than butter in general. Having spent my life as a pastry chef, I now find myself trying to cut down sugar in like a whole lot of different ways and in my baking recipes. And I was never really a super fan of making everything super sweet. Most of the time I do like butter in everything, but this is a nice alternative. And again, if you're not using the fruit on top and you're just going to make the cake, delicious. Let's do it. Really good. Okay, so let's go back and test on our eggs. Oh yeah, look at that. Nice and light. Take this down so you guys can see the texture more better here. So as you can see, this went from like a pale yellow to like almost white. And it's nice and thick here. So you can see as the drip there goes back into the pile, you can see the outline for like a considerable, several seconds before it all comes back together. So that's what we're looking for. I am going to give it a scrape. I'll set this down. Oops. We're going to use the whisk here to kind of scrape it around. Throw it back onto the mixer. And get everything back in, because now we're going to strain in our olive oil. I'm going to put this medium speed while we get this in. Don't dump it all at once. You want to go kind of slow and just let that drizzle in and let the mixture do its thing. If you end up with a sizable pool, just stop for a second and let it mix. And this, you know, we're adding the oil slowly just so that we don't lose all that air. If you just dump a bunch of fat right on top of your lovely whipped egg, you're going to have a really hard time incorporating it without completely disturbing them, so that you just put so much time with it. Especially if you're doing it by hand. Little by little. Bring it up as you go. Lovely. We'll let that come together. Let it whip for another like 2 minutes or so to fully incorporate. And drop it in between and give it a scrape. Number like 3 rule in baking is scrape, scrape, scrape. Means you're constantly scraping the sides of your bowl to make sure ingredients and your whisk or paddle to make sure all of your ingredients are getting combined, not just the ones that are sitting nicely in the bowl on the sides. And back on, nice and high. And we'll let that whip again. I guess I should mention that everything here is room temperature. And by room temperature, I really mean the same temperature. Room temperature is going to be different everywhere you are. I think I mentioned previously that my house is usually about 60 degrees. So everything that I'm using here is about 60 degrees. If you need to bring eggs or milk or something up to room temperature before you use it, obviously you can just leave it out. You can throw your milk in the microwave for a couple seconds. Eggs, put them in a bowl, uncracked, in hot water for like 2 minutes, brings them all the way through up to a nice room temperature and workable for cooking. So there. Okay, next, milk, whole milk. Can you use almond milk or another lactose-free option? Probably. I don't know. I haven't made this recipe or tested it. I would assume yes, maybe. If you do that, Aunt Ronnie, maybe let me know how that goes. There's no butter, so this would be the only lactose in there. I would be interested if someone's willing to test that out to see if that works, and if it comes out good. So let me know if you try that. So same deal with the milk. We're going to get the mixer going on like a nice medium speed and cream in milk a little bit at a time.
So if scraping is rule number 3, what are rules number 1 and 2?
It's a great question. Rule number 1, get an oven thermometer. Rule number 2, there's no crying in pastry. And rule number 3 is scrape.
No crying, did you say?
Yeah.
Why? Because
No
it
crying.
makes the food too salty?
Right, because it takes love. You know what I mean? If you're crying, then you're not loving. Okay. Milk is incorporated. That's good. We're going to throw in just a little bit of lemon juice here. Lovely. Stop our mixer and flip you guys around. Okay, so that looks good. Scraping here. Scrape. Back on the mixer. And now we're going to add our dry ingredients from before. Again, flour, spices, a little bit of chemical leaveners there with the baking soda and baking powder. That lemon juice or orange juice, whichever you decide, is going to interact with that to help it rise. In addition to all that lovely air we whipped into those eggs. So, flip you guys around. I'm on low speed now while we mix this in. And, you know, just try not to get flour everywhere. It's the only goal here. Let it come together a little bit, add a little bit more. Okay. Lovely. And again, I just want to mix it until it's just together. Once most of it gets mixed in kind of like that, to avoid over mixing, I am going to take it off of the mixer. Oops, and just kind of fold the rest in by hand. It's really easy to do because it's such a small amount. So okay. So scraping around, making sure that everything is nicely combined. Easy. You can see it's not really, this is a 6-quart bowl. You can see that it's not really that full. So it's a pretty small recipe. Easy to do by hand. And then our nicely prepared pan that is full of squash and maple syrup. Just gonna pour this over the top. No real special instruction there, just pour. And this is going to bake for about 40 minutes. So again, I've got my oven set and preheated to 375. I'm going to bake it in the center of the oven. Just tapping this on the counter. Hard to get the handle. We'll pop some of those larger bubbles. I don't have to go nuts. There they go. Yes, so about 40 minutes, halfway through, I am going to spin it around 180 degrees for even baking. At that point, I will also turn the temperature down to 350 degrees. Let me set the timer here. 20 minutes, start. Okay. Again, it doesn't take long to open the oven door and shove a pan in there, but with the ambient temperature in here, I really want to make sure that the oven is staying hot, and that pan and everything is nice and cool. So I'm going to 20 minutes from now, spin this. If at that time it doesn't look like the top is browning, overly browning, I would maybe leave it at 375. But when I tested this recipe yesterday, I did have to turn it down because the top isn't brown. Bake it another 20 minutes until a toothpick inserted comes out clean or mostly clean. A little bit of a misnomer there or whatever with the toothpick coming out clean thing, because cakes will continue to cook once you take them out at least a little bit. So if you've got like a couple crumbs hanging on, fine. If it comes out sopping wet, then you need to know you need to leave it in there to bake a little longer. But if you've got some crumbs hanging on or like just a little bit of batter, that is fine. It will continue to cook for a couple minutes after it comes out. When it's done, carefully go around the edge to make sure that the non-papered edge doesn't stick, and give it about 2 minutes at room temperature and then invert it. This is an upside down cake. You want it to be upside down. You need to get it out of the pan, and all of that caramelized fruit and maple syrup in the bottom will stick really bad if you don't get out of the pan while it's warm. But you don't want it to be fresh out of the oven and run the risk of it falling apart. You want it to set just a little bit coming out of the oven before flipping it over. Those paper sticking out of the side will help so that you can invert it and pull those pieces of paper out to help evenly lower the cake from the pan. And you can just do that onto a wire rack or a plate, and let it cool completely before serving. Or, slightly warm, also good. I don't usually recommend cake warm because you can ruin the texture when you're cutting it, but this cake in particular, really good kind of warm. You could also cool it completely, slice it, and then reheat it. Great for dessert, maybe with like a blackberry compote or vanilla anglaise, maybe a caramel sauce would be pretty good. Ice cream if you're into that hot and cold together thing. Also great for like brunch or breakfast. You could slice this, throw it in a pan to like sear it on both sides, almost like French toast without the extra batter. Delicious. Maybe with a little yogurt, pomegranate seeds or something like that. You can dress it up however you like, but all in all, a really just kind of well-balanced, not overly sweet dessert. So final view here. Let me get this out of the way. I have one that I made a couple days ago. And again, I think I mentioned that I didn't love the way I arranged the squash on it. So you'll see exactly what I mean. Dun, dun, dun. You can see the squash in there. It didn't come out quite as much as I wanted, so I added way more squash, and you can see it in this cut piece here. You get that nice squash in the top. But again, this is like a really nice crumb. It's really moist, almost like a pound cake, but not nearly as heavy. It's much lighter. And again, slice it, eat it how it is, fry it up, serve it with whipped cream or whatever you want, but it's really good. And again, highly customizable. You could use a different squash, use no squash. Apples would be really nice and very traditional. Pears would also be lovely. Not sure how peach would do, but hey, you want to throw some pineapple in there? Great. Now you've got pineapple upside down cake with like a slightly better cake in it. The maple syrup is a really nice touch. And that's pretty much it.
I think we need
Pretty simple.
smell-o-vision.
Yes. If I could just, give each of you a bite through the camera, that would probably make this a little bit more successful. Any questions about this recipe or anything else in general?
Diana, where do you put the inside the oven thermometer? Do you like hook it in the back of the oven, or where do you keep it?
I will show you exactly where mine is. So how did that happen? My cake pan is here.
Mm-hmm.
My thermometer is right there on the.
On the bottom rack.
Does that make sense? Can you see it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I try to keep it as close to where I'm baking as possible, because that's where you want it to read. If you throw it onto the bottom of the oven, like resting on the floor, you're going to get a slightly higher temperature. So you kind of want to keep it in the middle, but out of your way, as not knocking into it.
Do you keep it in the oven all the time, or just when you're baking something in particular, or do you take
all
it
the time?
just leave
I
it in?
never take it out. Yeah. If I've knocked it down or hit it really hard with like a cast iron pan or something like that, I might, thermometers are great and they are relatively foolproof, but can be knocked out of calibration if they're hit really hard or fall a lot. So, try to keep it in a centrally located spot that's not too much in the way. I don't bother taking it out unless I need to clean it if I can no longer read it. And I might replace mine every couple of years. I buy the like $12 one at the restaurant store. There's a couple different kinds. These ones are a little bit hard to calibrate. It's more about knowing what the difference is between the oven temperature that you set and the one that's in your oven. So that you can make that adjustment or know, if your actual oven is reading at 350, but you've got it set for 400, well, you need to increase to 450 before you bake something, to make sure you're getting the right temperature. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Diana, can you send us the recipe?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I will type it up and make that. Dad, maybe I can send that. Well, Ryan, I can send it directly to you, but if you would like the recipe to be available for everyone, I can send that to you for.
Yeah, I'll try it with the oat milk and see how it comes out.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I believe we're going to be posting this video available at least to members, if not, I don't know if it's going to be public or internal, but we can certainly post the recipe along with the video.
Well, it looks delicious.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'll update once this one is done and cooled and unmolded. We'll see what the top looks like by comparison to the other one. And
Yeah, you can take a
We'll
picture and send it if
compare.
you want.
Yeah,
yes. Yeah. I'll style it real nice.
sounds good. I'll put it in my next cookbook and give you the credit.
Okay. Wonderful.
It was great, Diana. And I can't
Thank
wait for the bite. Oh, look who's there.
Oh, look, is that Chef Lila?
Yeah.
Is that
Chef
Lila?
Lila.
Oh, she's joining
All
her
right.
auntie cooking.
That's great.
Excellent.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, thank
All
you.
Any other questions? Okay, no problem.
Very,
All
very
Thank
big.
you.
Very good.
Uh-oh.
Thanks, Diana.
Thank you.
All
You're
right.
welcome. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone who hasn't had it yet.
Happy
Happy
Thanksgiving to
Thanksgiving.
you too.